Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm Andrew Spiliotis. I'm a transportation planner with the town of Knightdale. This is our third advisory committee meeting for the comprehensive transportation plan update. This evening, we're going to be talking about, what the town has been working on with Stantec since we last met in February, with the majority of the meeting focused on the draft recommendations and getting your feedback on that. Just some quick reminders about the CTP in general. This is a long-range, multimodal transportation plan that's going to help us identify recommendations for all modes, what some of our top priorities are, costs for those top priorities to help us pursue funding for those projects. And it'll also update some of the existing transportation plan maps in our comprehensive plan and our unified development ordinance. For example, the maps for greenways and roadway functional classification and the collector street plan. So what the role is of the advisory committee, we've covered in the past, so I'll just speak on what we're looking for tonight. We're looking for you to receive the information on what we've been working on, but the main thing is we want to hear from you if how the draft recommendations, how they line up with your vision for the town's long-range transportation plan, whether that's your personal vision or any committees or boards you serve on for the town, or some combination of both. The next slide gives a quick recap of the overall schedule in the fall. We kicked it off, got the website going, had our symposium kickoff meeting. We also started meeting with stakeholders to receive their input in late fall, early winter. We had a urban design public workshop for 80 acres in downtown for transit-oriented development. And we also did existing conditions analysis in the winter. And then now we're at the point where we are working on draft recommendations. The next steps are, to receive your input tonight, to come to the council in July and receive input. And then later in the summer, we'll have a public outreach open house workshop and a 30-day comment period that builds off of that. And then that'll be likely putting us for late summer, early fall in front of the council for adoption consideration. So the next slide goes into the agenda. We're looking to approve the minutes for both advisory committee meetings is the first item on the agenda. Then we'll provide a summary of the outreach and activities we've been up to since we met in February. The majority of the meeting will focus on the draft recommendations and receiving your input and feedback. And if we have time, we'll start talking about how we'll prioritize projects in the CTP. If not, we'll follow up on that. And then we'll wrap up talking about next steps. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Stantec and open it up for if anybody has any revisions for either set of minutes or would like to make a motion for either. And also the minutes were attached to the meeting invite.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the minutes as read with any necessary corrections. Greg Hedgepeth.
Dustin Tripp, a second.
Thank you both. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to Stantec to start providing an update on the outreach and activities since we last met.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Just kind of want to get everybody recapped on kind of what we've gathered since we've last met and kind of give you some additional feedback, I guess, that's been received. So beginning with an update to all the numbers since the last time we met, the webpage visits is up to more than 2,100 unique visitors. So clearly it was very popular in the March and April timeline. Our survey, our first round online survey has officially closed at the end of March. And so we had over 317 respondents there. The interactive map where you could kind of zoom in certain areas and add places of interest did quite well during that period as well, launched on the project website. We had almost 300 points of interest, things like issues and barriers and connections that were needed. And then in March, we focused our attention to the public design workshop, and we had a visual preference survey, sometimes called a VPS. And that was, it was very well received. It was very visual with lots of photos and images, got a lot of people excited. And so the number of survey participants in the VPS was over 500, in fact. So kudos to everyone on the advisory committee for helping us spread the word and get that out there. Right, great response and good feedback for us to build upon. That was the whole reason to have kind of the VPS products, is to kind of show where people's preferences may lie. Previously, we talked about a pop-up event in December and some focus groups that took place in January and February. We augmented that with another pop-up event in May at the Latin American Festival. I'm going to highlight that in just a moment. The public symposium took place in early May, and then the urban design workshop about those 80 some acres and urban design treatments took place at the very end of March. I hope many of you took part in those activities. So on Saturday, the 7th, we came out to Knightdale Station Park. We interacted with a number of attendees, distributed some more online survey cards as well to make sure people are aware of the progress of the CTP, and then received some map markup comments here and there, as you can see from some of the photos. Just getting some more feedback on where challenges might be, specifically the hows and the whys. This one really focused a little bit more on transit than previously. So that was great to kind of get that specific feedback, since our booth was located right next to Go Triangle, who was speaking about transit operations as well. So one additional outreach event there. But the public design workshop, I'm going to turn this over to Scott if he wants to kind of run through these pieces. He was there with these 80 acres and how that process went over 2 days.
Yeah, thanks, Timothy. And I know some of you, or maybe the majority of you on the call here, participated in this workshop and the events leading up to it. So just thank you for your patience as I go through this again, and please feel free to contribute anything that leave out. But a little over 80 acres in what is popularly known as Old Town Knightdale. And normally we're in a very reactive position in transportation and land development, even generally, where people come to us with proposals. In this case, the town really tried to get out ahead of things and understand how this area could develop to support the town and the desires of the people that live here now, and make things more transit supportive, encourage biking and walking, and blending with the downtown and existing residents a little bit better than if we just left it to open chance, perhaps. So, next slide. Even as the design team and consultants were setting up, we were working with people that were dropping into the meeting space in town hall, and asked people to do a visual preference survey with dots, and thinking about mobility options, living options, shopping, office, things like that, kind of developments they really wanted to see. And in the area, that really fed into the design process. This is the final product. No, just kidding. This is actually the very first sketch. It took me a while to figure out the artist. Look up Kandinsky, and this is the artist this reminds me of. But just to get your bearings straight, this was the opening salvo of the graphic, with Knightdale Boulevard running left, right across the top. Smithfield, thanks Cindy. Smithfield kind of up and down, and North First Avenue the way, and then Knightdale Station there. So this is the area we're really dealing with. A lot of existing residential single-family homes in the south corner of that triangle. Obviously, the Lowe's and Lowe's shopping center is already there. We do have a big high-tension power line running right through the middle, as well as some preserved area for Mingo Creek and Mingo Creek Greenway at one point. So this has kind of helped the designers just get our initial understanding of the flows and kinds of traffic moving in and out of the site, which led to this. And you can see a little bit more solidified types of land uses, thinking about more specifics about what could go where. Again, some of the similar constraints with retail up at the top near the high volume roadway at Knightdale Boulevard, the hard corner there at McKnight as well. And then thinking about what would go well in terms of residential down through the heart of that tract. A little bit cleaner still. So this is a more refined version. And what we see here, just to give you a clue, on the top near McKnight and Knightdale Boulevard, that corner, retail, more mixed use and retail over to the right, Timothy. Yeah, and then as you move down the site a little bit, you get into the green space from Mingo Creek, apartment condo types of multifamily developments, the Center Greenway, and then ending up back again at the southwest corner with townhomes and maybe even some live work types of arrangements. And you begin to see also in this graphic where we've got some roundabouts and thinking about ease of access, ingress and egress into and out of the site for all the people going potentially through it and into it. So those things are really important as the project and the study continued over 2 days. So after listening to the public a little bit more, the big difference here, and Timothy, you can just flip back and forth between this one and the last one. Look at the center of the graphic and then back. Yeah. So what happened was we wanted to make sure that we respected the people that were already existing and living there in Knightdale. And so we kind of made the center a little bit more single family residential, kept townhomes along the what would be a new spine road running roughly southwest northeast, still keeping townhomes retail and mixed use still at the top north end. That didn't change. And you can also begin to see in this graphic more pedestrian amenities getting into and out of the site. So this is where we kind of landed. And if you click one more time, you'll see the village green. And then one more time, a graphic of what that might look like, an artist's conception, obviously, but very much oriented to pedestrian movements, which is also, and we'll talk about this later, very much oriented to transit viability. So giving people more living options, more price points is going to be more and more important as the area around Knightdale develops too, and more residential and retail options as well. So kind of reminds me a little bit of an area in Leesburg, but that's just me. But this is great. So I'll stop there and let Timothy take it back over to go through some of the modal options to serve stuff like this.
Appreciate it, Scott. It's a good way to kind of show the progression from beginning to middle to end. So we certainly didn't walk in with preconceived notions. We listened, we used the visual preference survey. We made several iterations along the way, ultimately getting more and more refined with what we heard. So hopefully a lot of you have kind of seen some of those pieces before. We just wanted to kind of update the advisory committee on those. And a lot more of these resources are available at shiftknightdale.com. We put all the final presentation slides with, up to 40 additional slides that kind of went with this in photographs. So more products are available to peruse as well. Great process. Any questions on that before we get into specifics of here and there? Just kind of want to pause for just a moment. Okay, if so, just go ahead and use the chat box as well. We're certainly happy to revisit and pause and go back. But adding those pieces to some of the previous items for engagement that we've heard, we had an interim review of the survey. We had some lessons learned from focus groups and things like that covered under our previous advisory committee meetings. But we want to kind of break down by mode, the vehicle, the walking, biking, and then the transit, kind of where we're leaning towards and how we can continue shaping these long range recommendations. So beginning with roadways, because it's kind of the easiest to start with. And this is similarly going to be a little bit of a narrative. So stick with me. And if I lose you, please raise your hand or use the chat box. I'm happy to go back and revisit because I don't want to lose people here in the middle. We've got about 10 slides on the roadway side. So this was our starting point. This is the Knightdale Next Comp Plan. This is their streets network that kind of framed out the major arterials in red and orange, whether they're owned by NCDOT or the town of Knightdale. The medium-sized collector streets, whether they are DOT roadways in blue or whether they're Knightdale in purple. So getting a little colder. And then the local streets, the kind of the greens, whether they're turquoise green or light green. And those are all kind of local streets managed and maintained, built by the private sector, maintained by the town of Knightdale, and whether or not they're local street connections or walkable spines. So it starts with the hierarchy of big roads to little roads. And so I'm going to test you guys to look at this from the reds first, right? And then the oranges kind of complement those segments. And then look it down to the blues and the purples, the little colder colors, and how they're connecting into those major roads. And then lastly, the green, the smallest road segments that are connecting through. So think about that in these three big hierarchies from big to small. And that will kind of help us frame the rest of the conversation and story here. So if this was our starting point, this is our network that we first constructed based on that starting point. There was a lot of refinements and there were some new roadway connections to be made. We've learned a lot since 2018, so a lot that was brought up to speed. We looked at more than 20 development site plans that are in your pipeline and made sure those roads are being accounted for in this process. So that contributed a lot of new dashed line connections. We looked at the Campo's recently completed 2050 MTP to make sure that those roadways, though the alignments are more refined, we wanted to make sure they were accounted for as well in here by the same structure. Existing roads that are there today are in solid, and then proposed roads that are not there today right now, the new locations are the dash lines. And then lastly, some engagement feedback connection points thus far. We kind of had those contributions in mind as well. So I'm going to toggle back and forth a couple times just to kind of show you this was our starting point relative to scale. And you can see we added a lot more density of road connections here and there. They're just a lot of more new linkages and then a lot of different alignments to those linkages. And in summary, we basically added a lot of collectors and locals, the blues, purples, and greens. We revised the geometry and the alignment in a lot of locations by adding topography and looking at aerial imagery and being more focused on stream crossings. So that made a lot of adjustments. And then we made this more consistent with the current MTP, which was not around in 2018. It was a completely different version. Now we've got a brand new MTP and we're up to kind of those assessments and those recommendations. So we're now up to 2022. It's a great refinement, but of course we're not done, right? Let's look at this a couple other ways. The first question we asked ourselves is, are these roadways really consistent with the current UDO? So let's begin there. It's more of a conversation and discussion. Right now, there's 6 categories of roadways. There's a lot of attributes about those roadways, but I want to kind of frame this as number of lanes. There's your big major roads in red, and they are the darkest colors in red and maroon. Then you get down to the 3-lane options or the 2-lane options in the middle, and down to your local roads in the blue, the 1 and 2 lane options there too. The right of way, likewise, from widest right of way down to more narrow right of ways. And then whether there's things like curb and gutter, medians, parking, the typical posted speeds along those roads, and then whether there's bicycle accommodations. And let's not get bogged out in the details here. I would just summarize to say shared lane markings are usually for roads that are slow enough or have a low enough volume where you can ride with vehicles. Or if you have higher speeds, higher volume, you shoot for bike lanes. Where you see no bike lanes, it's because there is usually parking. So those are kind of going in pair. It's one or the other for most of these roadway types. And then from there, there's a lot of sidewalks. So if this is, again, the high level big picture of your UDO from maroon to red to orange to yellow to green to blue, let's see kind of what that looks like as cross sections. If we revisit them, the widest cross sections here, your urban boulevards with the most amount of volume, the 4 lanes plus a median, kind of looks like these. The non-urban boulevards just kind of on the fringe, a little bit tighter. I guess there's no on-street parking in that example there too. And then as we scale a little smaller, your urban avenues and avenues, whether or not there's a median. And here's the example of bicycle lanes in this example, or I'm sorry, bicycle lanes in the top example, or on-street parking in the larger example. So just kind of the trade-off between the bike lane option or the parking option. That's where those flip-flop back and forth. And then from avenues down to your main street and local streets, just scaling down from big to small. And if I haven't lost you just yet, then it looks like this. So now I have lost you. And there's a reason we tried to scale down from those perspectives. If you start squinting your eyes and say, okay, I see some red, I see some orange, I see some yellow. I can sort of see how we've turned those recommended streets from that other hierarchy, the arterials, the collectors, and the locals, now into these UDO standards, the boulevards, the avenues, and the main streets. So that was great, and that was really fun. But Timothy, this is really hard to see on a PowerPoint slide. So though we're going to walk through this in Mural, let's look at this one more time and kind of stagger it from big to small. So let's start with those big roads, obviously the interstates, and then the major roads supporting them, the 6 lanes and above. So again, this is the same roadway network. We've just blurred out or grayed out the lower level roads, beginning with, I-87 is a major thoroughfare through 540 and its completion extension to the south. It will add another 6 lanes. And then portions of Nightdale Boulevard and Smithfield Road are 6 lanes in the future of our CTP network. So with that, we would then layer in the next level down, the 4 lanes. And so this is where we're complementing those major thoroughfares with some pretty significant urban boulevards or traditional boulevards. And again, existing roadways that are out there right now are the solid colors. You see Buffalo Road is a significant corridor, Marks Creek north-south in the Mailman segment, kind of over here on the east side. And then, of course, Pool Road across the southern extent, a major east-west roadway that we're sort of thinking is a boulevard, 4 lanes in the future, and it's concurrent with the 2050 MTP recommendations right now. I will point out that between the existing roads and the proposed new roads, what we've formed is this kind of outer periphery road of 4 lanes where we're trying to keep vehicles out of the core of Nightdale and encouraging them to use kind of the outer periphery roads instead, the lone exception being this extension of Old Cruise into Nightdale Boulevard, which in theory will be pulling vehicles off of Smithfield Road. So if we went from the 6 lanes and above now down to the 4 lanes, this was kind of our roadway network. If we then layer in the 2 and 3 lanes, it makes a lot of local connections. And I understand and acknowledge there's a lot of lines there. It looks like a lot of spaghetti. But what we're doing is we're adding 2 lanes, or in some case 3-lane connectors, so that you don't have to use the major roads, right? So these are the local streets and the collector streets that get you from your neighborhood out to these resources or through your town without always getting on the major corridors or without making every road a major corridor. I think that's an important distinction to make, is these are more complementary roads, they're more everyday roads, and they really do relate to your avenues and your main streets, mostly here, your 2 and 3 lanes. And then lastly, if you layer in the ramps in blue, which can barely show up here as well, the 1-lane ramps on and off. So here's that periphery road again. It's a collection of periphery roads that kind of help. They help the broader transportation network function without forcing everyone to go through Old Town on a 4-lane boulevard. So that's sort of the idea behind this outer network collection. And of course, and then utilizing your core for more walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly opportunities for development and for mobility. So on a big picture level, we've kind of gone high to medium to low. I'd love to pause here, acknowledging that we happily jump over and see these in more detail in the mural and just specifics. But as far as the concept goes, I'd love to hear some feedback on what you've seen thus far. We really want to hear from this committee and kind of feel your feedback.
This is McDonald. I'll just go ahead and jump in. I just kind of in general, I'm seeing a lot more roads with a lot of lanes, a lot of right of way than we're really looking for. I think we're trying to really dive into actually de-emphasizing the car, emphasizing efficiency of movement over, just the volume of cars going through. And so specifically, I'm concerned about Hodge Road north of 87. Much of that's already a built environment. And I just in general, I think I'd like to see a lot more urban Ave or avenue just kind of throughout. And then, I know currently Smithfield Road handles a lot of volume, but I kind of question if 6 lanes is really going to be necessary with the completion of 540 eventually coming through. Those are kind of my high level thoughts. A lot less red, a lot more orange. What I'm looking for.
Noted. I'm keeping a record here on the side, so if you see me typing and looking away, it's because I want to make sure I'm capturing all these. I want to hear from some more people as well. This is all about kind of first impressions and how we can modify this moving forward.
Yes, this is Morgan here. I think, I would echo those same comments. It makes a lot of sense to try to keep, I think it's a great move to try to get people out of Old Town or the downtown district on other roads. Sort of see Old Faison probably being an entranceway, another entranceway in. There is just trying to figure out how to get people from the northern side of Nightdale Boulevard, down south along Smithfield is probably going to be another connection that people are still going to take Smithfield through town. But the Hodge Road is something that I'm really sort of keeping my eyes on too. There's a built environment. It really changes the nature of some of our residential areas in there. And it is a challenge. I think we all recognize the challenges with 540 and 64 and 87, but I concur. And I'm hoping when we start talking about the other modes, maybe some of the mixed, shared use lanes that I think back on the typical sections, I'm hoping that we might move away from the relatively narrow 5-foot sidewalks to much wider mixed use or shared use type facilities where an example might be some of those corridors could be opened up to other modes of transportation rather than the car.
Bravo. Agreed, particularly the shared use path component as well. But let's talk about Hodge Road in particular. And I don't claim to be a traffic engineer. I do see the value in Hodge Road is one exit off of 87. Smithfield Road is a second off of 87, and Wendell Falls / Nightdale Eagle Rock is a third. And so just knowing the significance of the vehicles that those roads carry, they're clearly going to be elevated in the minds of DOT and Campo and regional partners as regional mobility corridors. The other part of that, and I agree, it is a neighborhood roadway down here, is that this connection and then realignment with Legacy Oaks Drive is planned from the city of Raleigh, and that really does make this old Milburny north-south kind of road much more significant, and that is actually what's funneling into Hodge Road. So I think the nature of Hodge Road, just my observation, what it is now isn't really what it's going to be in the future because of these connections. And that's just a force that we get to battle through these improvements to multimodal transportation by improving other connections in other possible ways, by making sure that it's not the only way to get around town. And so it is a good complement to, we're not making improvements to Hodge Road tomorrow, we're just seeing its significance and how we can sort of mitigate that vehicular mode with alternative modes. So we really are trying to balance the kind of the needs across a lot of different connectors. I think it does reinforce the need for those local connector roads so that Hodge Road isn't the only way north-south. I think that's probably the best way to summarize that.
And this is Mark. I absolutely agree. We want to de-emphasize the car, but I am inclined to defer to the traffic engineers on some of that. At first I thought, Old Faison is such a nice country road, but it is the way I go in and out of Raleigh every day, or now whenever I go. So I was focused more on the little connections. So I did see a lot of those. I wasn't clear on maybe the northern periphery road. It looks like it goes from maybe Lucas to, or is that Horton, over to Forestville. sort of becomes that. Just trying to get a feel for it. And so some of the hot spots I look for are, you know, the intersection at Smithfield and First. I see good connection out of the back of Carrington Woods. I see the Wide Waters extension. So some of those are the things that I really wanted to make sure are there. I love the idea of that realignment over there to provide another north-south. We do have a lot of, we don't have a lot of north-south connections, and so that would help. And was the old cruise extension on the comp plan originally?
It
Yes.
was in the MCP. Yep, there it is.
And that may have been what we thought, you know, we don't know if we could do it, but we'll put it on the map in case we can. Because obviously that's a narrow spot. It's hard to build through. Also, for context, and where I think I can add value to what the engineers are saying is Smithfield Road, and y'all can't see my mouse, but just north of First Avenue, is quite narrow through there. I don't know how you fit 6 lanes without, you know, demolishing houses. So just FYI that is a particularly tight spot.
Absolutely, it is. And thanks for bringing up the northern connector piece here too. This is also kind of a long range connection point across the north that we inherited. We sort of changed the geometry and the alignment over here, made sure it didn't conflict with some of the development plans around it. And then we're seeing this connection with Forestville Road a little bit differently than previously. So with the Skycrest Drive extension, with the new exit off of 540, Skycrest Drive is going to be kind of the much more heavily traveled route. And Forestville Road right now, which doesn't have an exit, is the more heavily favored route. So I think there's a lot of adjustments to be had in here between crossing Beaver Dam Creek and making sure that these 2 roads come together before the creek. There's one bridge over the creek. And then from there, there's a very easy option to head east versus to head south. So the dominant movement here is kind of an east-west, and it's going to take a couple of intersection improvements in this area to kind of make it just right over time. The other piece I'd add to that is this is not happening tomorrow. This is not happening by 2025. You know, these are 2050 kind of visions. And our idea here as transportation planners and designers is hopefully to make sure that these 4-lane roadways aren't needed by then, right? So we're sort of reserving the capacity for them in our long range plan, but we're actively working towards other modes of transportation so we don't have to build them. So think of this with a grain of salt. This is what we're planning for, but we're actively working to mitigate that in the meantime.
So later in the plan, would there be an accommodation for, I think, Princeton Manor? They widened the road, but perhaps we don't want that if we're not confident we're going to go that level. Maybe we dedicate the right of way and build it in a way that allows us to expand if we have to. Okay. And I've always wanted to figure out how to get Nightdale to, and I'll say fatten up. You know, the commercial corridor right through there has a lot of lights and all the activities right there. And it has always been a question of, well, how do we move some of it a little north and some of it a little south, so that we get activity a little north and a little south of that. So maybe this does that.
Great points, great observations. Any others here? I think I kind of want to continue this conversation. Clearly there's other things we want to cover, but I think this is a great start. Perhaps the mural board is the next option for us to kind of zoom in and see some of these roads in more detail. So if there's not any other quick comments and observations, we'll kind of move towards the walking and biking. I do see Scott has his hand up.
I'll let someone else go if they want to go.
What's the announcement?
I was going to say, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
This is McDonald. I kind of wanted to go back and talk about the Hodge Road corridor, urban boulevards, the number of lanes topic again, and just make sure I'm understanding kind of the relationship between the different plans. I understand what the state is saying and the state's envisioning this corridor here, but in general, I kind of thought that our vibe was we're rejecting that. Like, this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of us de-emphasizing the car. And I'm not really understanding why we wouldn't push and make sure that it's known that the local preferred option isn't something that is more walkable. It's a nice place to live, and not, a 4-6 lane boulevard divided, regional roadway. We don't want that, is what I was picturing.
Counselor McDonald, I'm happy to field that question. So, development services staff is definitely aware of that vision and, feedback the council's provided previously. We wanted to, share with you all, what we've come up in terms of draft recommendations based on, the regional travel demand model and other variables. We have been talking internally about a lot of these concerns y'all brought up and wanted to present this and hear your feedback and figure out, how exactly we handle providing capacity and balancing all modes of transportation. We've brought up the issue of Hodge Road. The last plan had it 4 lanes just below Linwood Connector, and we've even talked about maybe it needs to be even below the Mingo Creek crossing in the school, given you're trying to balance pedestrian and bicycle movements as well. And so, we've requested additional data and started looking at it related to projected volume to capacity ratios and stuff like that. And what we're kind of finding is you could really go either way with if 4 lanes are needed on some of these roads, or if 2 lanes are adequate. If you go 2 lanes, you may have some peak hour congestion, but the rest of the time you're not overbuilding, and that congestion could be encouraging people to use other modes of transportation. So we wanted to present the recommendations as received to get your feedback. We certainly, see the concerns around roads like Hodge, and we also understand where Mailman Road turns into Marks Creek Road. Some of those connections may not be feasible based off some development plans under review. So it may just end up needing to be 2 lanes in some of those segments. One thing we did want to touch on is, are there any roadways shown for 4 lanes that y'all do think maybe should be 4 lanes? One thing I personally wrestle with is, if Hodge Road is out, do you try to make Mailman, Marks Creek 4 lanes? So you have one corridor that's 4 lanes going north-south. So that's kind of where we're at internally as a staff, if that helps give it a little bit of additional clarity.
I'll just say I really appreciate the way you thoughtfully worked through that. The idea that, maybe it makes sense to not have 4 lanes until south of the school. And so then you might have, because I don't control how much development there's, to the south of Hodge Road. So my fear is seeing how it backs up now, that could become a bottleneck. But if it were 4 lanes with that bridge south of 87, or then maybe that helps. Of course, that's not what this is showing. This isn't even showing 4 lanes south of it. It's showing it just north. Is that right?
Yeah, north of Pool Road.
Oh, okay. I'm colorblind. I sometimes miss the red, and I was looking at the yellow highlighter. Okay.
So I think we can take this feedback and go with, we can look at how a 4 lane would transition to a 3 lane, transition to a 2 lane, back up to a 3 lane and a 4 lane, if that's the kind of desire to go with that. And we can workshop through that as well. But again, for the long range transportation plan, we want to look at reserving the right of way for future needs while hoping to not build it in the near or midterm.
And from my perspective, the goal is to make it walkable, bikeable, to be able to get across it. We do want to de-emphasize the car, but I also want to hear the engineers, feedback. Listen to the scientists. I want to see, what's going to work.
that was going to be my next comment is I think ultimately a walkable, bikeable, it's 45 miles per hour now. I think, 30 or 35 would work much better. The next question or concern I would have would be the intersections and the way we're moving traffic. Not trying to avoid more signals and, maybe using other turning movements, one at Mingo Crest and, Hodge. It is, hopefully we could look at, a roundabout or some other type of movement there rather than just a signal, or maybe the signal's there just during school hours. But I think those are other concerns because it's, ultimately we build more lanes, but then if we're putting more signals, we're just building them to store cars and not move cars. So there is a trade-off there. And if we can figure out how to accommodate all of those concerns, and if someone is in one of the southern neighborhoods and want to go north, but there's an opportunity to take a golf cart or a scooter or a bicycle, but they feel safe doing it, I think is another worthy goal of this exercise.
Great points. All really great points. Hopefully I captured all of them. Okay, so in the interest of time, let's table that and we can kind of revisit that through the mural. I wanted to just kind of note there's some additional hotspot and concept designs that we're looking at in more detail. A lot of the signalized crossings near transit stops along Knightdale Boulevard is one that we're taking kind of a more engineering level approach to these locations. The Widewater bridge over the railroad tracks is something we're looking at and examining, as well as the intersection of Bethlehem Road and Old Faison and how that kind of aligns, and see what we can do there too. So we're having our conceptual designers look at more detail on those 20% kind of engineering plans, getting some better cost estimates, which would really help you set the table for some more feasibility studies. More to come on those later. So let's jump into the walking and biking, because again, it's a complement to it. It's hard to start with this, which is why we started with roadway. But we're going to similarly build from existing sidewalks in purple and greenways / shared use paths, whether they're kind of located along a stream corridor or roadway side. Here's kind of your network as it exists today. And we spent a lot of time updating this to now using 2021 aerials. You can notably see the Mingo Creek Greenway, the Knightdale Station Park trails, and how it connects with the Neuse River Greenway as well. So the proposed network is looking to add more than 24 miles of sidewalks. This is in the hardest to see, lightest color purple in these dashes. There's a lot of extensions along Knightdale Boulevard, but also stemming out of Old Town. So anything that connects kind of roadways in the core a little bit outward, we've mostly got sidewalk extensions there. And then your greenways or side paths or shared use path, essentially the same thing. It's just where it occurs, whether it follows a greenway, the roadway, or whether it's more of a recreation trail versus transportation side of the road. That's your light green and your orange as well. So a lot more of the larger roads would have a side path because there's too high volume or too high speed for bikers to be on roads. So it's really a side path, multi-use path on the side. So something like Old Cruise, Smithfield Road, one section there, Bethlehem Road further out, and then Forestville Road as well, some of those side paths. And then greenways in lighter, if there's a lot of curve to it, it's because it follows a stream alignment. And a lot of these we inherited from the Wake County Greenways plan. So some of these connectors up here would follow Beaver Dam Creek across and over, and then adding in on the east side of the Neuse River, a greenway trail that kind of follows both sides. So many more miles of those, like 68 miles of those, some of them being roadside adjacent, some of them being stream corridors. So if this is the walking piece, to talk quickly about the bicycles, we acknowledge that there's different types of bicyclists. There's different skill sets, there's different levels of comfort when it comes to riding with traffic. They all have different needs and they all have different trip purposes. So we're sort of gauging our assessment on the interested but concerned group, the largest group of bicyclists, and emphasizing all ages and abilities, sometimes called the AAA. And this approach kind of helps us design for the greatest number of users and emphasizing those low stress networks. So we're kind of gearing towards these cyclists and trying not to accommodate only the advanced cyclists, which represents actually a very small proportion. So you may have seen previously, we did this level of traffic stress, which is basically like how easy is it to bike along certain roads. The red and the oranges are too fast, too many volume of vehicles to make it really safe and easy. So they were for the moderate to caution to advanced cyclists only. But the blues are a lot of your neighborhood streets. And so that's the low stress network we're trying to talk about. So we've got some significant barriers to overcome, but there is kind of the beginnings of a network beginning on the local roads. And we want to build upon that by having more of these separated bike lanes. That's the bike lanes up above the curb, kind of adjacent to the sidewalks, and not actually down between the curbs with the roadways. So separate bike lanes in orange along these significant arterials. The buffered bike lanes, there's really only one good option, and that's because we have, this portion of Old Millbury as well too. Wide enough shoulders where we could fit in the extra 3 feet of horizontal buffer. Traditional bike lanes, if the volumes and the speeds are low enough to utilize the sides of the roadways on, say, Old Bethlehem Road. And then shared lane markings where speed and volume are so low that it's a neighborhood street. We can kind of, the vehicle and the bicycle can be in the same lane at the same time because we're talking 25 miles per hour or less. So this is our kind of proposed framework for how to make sure we translate that all ages and abilities into our roadway projects so they can get constructed with the bicycle improvement projects at the same time. I believe I had, yes. And when you throw in the greenways and shared use paths, it makes that complementary network that much more impressive. So if we're also building the greenways off-road, now you've got many more options to kind of get there to accommodate much more of those 8 to 80 riders. So, one is more for the moderate cyclist who wants to kind of be out and move a little quicker with traffic in some cases. And then the low stress network is really for all those other age groups that are not as confident and need much more separation from vehicles. Again, this will be on the mural link so you can zoom in and get much more detailed improvements on what we're recommending on individual roads. Questions or comments or concerned about the walking and biking section before we jump over to transit next?
Timothy, do you mind backing up to the greenways only slide? I wanted to just give a brief summary to everybody of kind of what are some of the trails we added, because I know it's a lot to take in.
It is.
Okay, so say we're starting in the upper left part of the map. We've added in a greenway that goes from Legacy Oaks over towards the existing Neuse River Trail at the Old Mill Bernie Dam. So as that property develops, we could establish that connection. Also in that area on the east side of 540, we added in a trail that would connect Allen Park, the southern part of that Beaver Dam Creek Greenway, down to Midway Plantation, then go over the boulevard all the way down to Mingo Creek, to connect people into a lot of the retail in town. Just on the other side of 540 from there, we added in some trails to the east or between Hodge Road and 540, and then across the street on Hodge Road at Diane Street, to just kind of connect that area better into the Neuse River Greenway. And as we start talking about a river district, we thought some of these trails would really help start creating like more of a sense of place. Some of the other new additions we have in there, calling for a side path along that road that would extend Old Cruise. So that would, go over the boulevard, connect over to Walmart, where we're going to talk more in a minute about having a mobility hub in that area. So making that multimodal connection. And we also thought that'd be a good place to cross the boulevard because you're on the other side of the quarry. And then the last kind of new concept that we added is, we hear a lot in the region and even at the MPO level, one of the top greenway needs is connecting downtown Knightdale to Wendell Falls. And, there's challenges to get between one and the other, given the I-87 interchange and that barrier. So we added in, you've got the trail along the railroad, but at Marks Creek Road at that existing grade separation, because you only get so many with the railroad, we added in another option to make that connection to Wendell Falls between, the Duke Energy property and the development that's going to come in that area. And then using a power easement to cross over the highway, and then you connect into the future Lake Myra Park. So those are some of the major changes I just wanted to touch on and summarize.
Well said. Lots of edits.
Real quick, I was seeing on there the railroad. Is there something along the railroad right of way? Is that new, or is that? And then also the Wide Waters crossing. I was wondering about those two.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. We do show kind of a side path adjacent to the rail corridor or within kind of the edge of the right of way. And that's a long range proposed connector, just so we can utilize that space and connect back in with Mingo Creek, which then gets you to the Neuse River. So this kind of section from the Wide Waters Parkway extension area all the way through town, all the way out to where it would meet up with several other options. Really critical connecting point that kind of could make a nice regional network east-west with Wendell. I mean, I kind of love that corridor for its potential.
That's not a new concept for that development proposed in that Wide Waters area. We've provided that comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the north-south there, I did follow some development plans to kind of make sure that alignment was about right. So I drew that based on some site plans that I saw.
Yeah, and I think we, to Timothy's point, we tweaked the alignment just above, Old Faison Road there, just kind of, straighten it out, like you said.
Lots of tweaks. If I'm being honest, lots of tweaks.
And then just real quickly on Mingo Creek is still, it may be on another map. I just want to make sure there was some connections in and out.
So a lot of, and it's about as far as I can zoom, a lot of
and I'm speaking of
extensions.
Off of Hodge Road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at the school, that area. I mean, from there, getting back into town, maybe is that along Old Faison, or how would that happen?
So right now it's back over to Hodge. It's a side path to get you up Hodge onto the Greenway and then back, because unfortunately we're just not going to get an at-grade crossing of the railroad corridor. We're not exactly handing those out these days. I wish they were. And then 540 is another challenge. Can't exactly go over or under 540 these days. So open to some creative solutions. But right now it's about routing to your nearest corridor north-south.
Yeah, we've limited the number of crossings of the interstates and railroad, given just feasibility and cost. But if there's places y'all think there's no harm in showing it on the map. We just know it's kind of going to be a lot of uphill battles to get those implemented.
And by the way, I'll go ahead and say something, since everyone would expect me to on the greenways, but I'm fairly happy with it and like the additions. Is it possible to go for a grade separated road and road crossing on Hodge over the railroad track? I mean, it's at the bottom of a hill, I don't know if that's doable or not. I'm really not sure, but by taking out that intersection, I guess they're still not going to give us another one back, though. They're just going to take the win.
I will say, like where I live at in Raleigh, they're doing that over the House Creek Trail and Blue Ridge Road. So I mean, and they got NPO funding for it. So I think it's definitely possible to do at some point in the future.
McDonald. I'm sorry, go ahead, Swan.
No, I was just going to say maybe it's good to have that on the radar as far as Hodge Road.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to comment on and say is down on the new section of 540, that we're all waiting on between Pool and 87. Is there potential there where we could look at having an east-west connector there, and they might reserve us a pedestrian tunnel underneath 540 or something like that as they get ready to build?
Along Pool Road?
So yeah, right there,
Or
Pool
south.
Road, going north where they're showing the future extension of 540. Is there a spot there where we might look at, indicating that we'd like an east-west, greenway connection right there where?
So there will be a side path along the north side of Pool Road. You're probably talking much further north than that. So we'll take the side path and we'll look for other connection points here as well and have that conversation. I think it's worthy of noting these, especially in our meeting minutes here, and see kind of what sticks when we throw it against the wall.
Sure, I just didn't know if, DOT might be open if they're, when they get into the planning phases of, oh, you've got a, greenway here on the map, maybe we could look at, building you a beautiful tunnel.
I think it's worth yelling that. So I think now is the time to get that.
I
put it in is nothing.
The Roseville bypass had 4 such tunnels underneath it, only because somebody thought in a meeting probably much like this one many years ago that it was a good idea to do it, and they stayed in there throughout all the years of planning and design. So, good point.
Yeah, I remember working on that project. I think that Diane Street is a wonderful idea, and I think it opens up a really great opportunity from getting downtown to the Greenway in a different manner. I think that's a really great and probably opens up some different thoughts about development in different areas there. But the Mingo Creek, that Old Faison Road, 540 River Railroad is still, that's sort of it's just a tough little spot,
Agreed. Really want to continue the conversation, but because we have Mural to add some of these comments, let's kind of forge ahead to transit and kind of have Scott explain kind of where our draft recommendations for their stand, and we can kind of circle back when we get to Mural.
Yeah, and I'll try to be fairly succinct here too. I know we're running short on time. You can go ahead. So it helps me to think about things visually and conceptually. I don't know if anybody else is like that, but if you think about transit as being on the far left hand of this graphic, which you've got now, sort of, you've got a local bus service now, Route 33 at the top. The ZWX Express, which is the middle line, blue middle line, doesn't actually have a stop within the town limits. And then at the bottom, the green, all the supporting improvements from various land use policies like we talked about with the Suggs tract, the old town property, the public design workshop that happened there, those kinds of things, sidewalks and bikeways that Timothy just reviewed. All those things kind of support transit as well as branding and marketing. We won't touch on those a lot, but there are specific recommendations in the draft moving forward for those kinds of things. And then sort of between the blue and the orange is a dark blue, which we're now seeing a lot with micromobility and mobility as a service. And there is as I think most people know at this point, a pilot service taking place in Northeast Wake County that was sponsored by a grant that by all accounts is doing fairly well, and unfortunately only minimally impacts Knightdale at this point. But thinking about technology and technology enhancements to traditional services is really an important part of this. So for me, as I was developing through the different kinds of recommendations all the way to bus rapid transit and even beyond, really, passenger rail service off to the right someplace, these sorts of things were really helpful to me to visualize all the different interconnected parts, because there's a few. And then the next slide, too. So we very briefly mentioned mobility hubs. At the extreme end of the scale, a mobility hub could be a bus stop sign and a bench and maybe one other thing, like bike parking, or a parking lot nearby that people can park and then take the bus. At the other extreme end is where you have mobility concierges, you've got car sharing, you've got e-scooters and e-bikes and all sorts of things, retail that are kind of oriented towards those travelers, all the way up to that end. So rather than thinking about having just a bus stop, think about them as their potential for moving into something that's much more important to the communities they're serving. There are different scales of mobility hub that Timothy's showing here in his map, everything from the smaller end options that I mentioned all the way up into some regional scale, which is off to the right in Wendell Falls at this point. But there are other opportunities here too, including the Old Town track we discussed at length earlier in the presentation, the traditional Nightdale, or the new, I guess, Nightdale Town Hall and Library Complex and shopping centers are also opportunities for enhanced mobility locations. And by the way, we had a good conversation with somebody at RTP and Research Triangle Foundation about the mobility hub that they are actually constructing now at RTP. So this is another concept that we think has a lot of good ways to pull the gravity in towards transit, which we've kind of been missing a bit. Apart from that, there are other improvements here, extensions of the local bus service Route 33 to the east and west, west at least to the Wake Med Center in my mind, and then east out to the new Eastern Wake Tech campus in Wendell. ZWX would be great if we had a stop actually in Nightdale. And there are a couple opportunities maybe to do that. And then ultimately, bus rapid transit coming through town, out of the Wake Med area and into even the town center, and again the Suggs track, the blue line. Yeah, thanks. So that's kind of the brief things, but also it is supporting things. The sidewalk improvements, a lot of those. I was looking at this, and I generated about 30 or 40 sidewalk improvements just on my own to support the stop. It's generated a lot of intersection crossing improvements. It's not fun to get off the bus on one side of the street and then cross over the other side of a really busy Nightdale Boulevard. So making sure the intersections are approachable and accessible is also really important. All the things that Timothy talked about earlier. So that's the core, very, very quickly, of the transit recommendations. And I know Brandon Watson's on the call here, so thanks to Campo and Brandon for some of their insights too, as we talked in the early stages with them. And I guess we could talk a little bit more about specifics here if you want.
Yes,
This is
I'm happy
also
to field any
map.
responses and reactions to this. We can do it map wise, and we can kind of do it graphic wise.
So this is Morgan. One quick thing, but on that last map, the mobility hub neighborhood scale, I think it's near March Creek. Was that, we had that development come in the other night. Jason remembers it. And Andrew, you may have been in there, but that would be in a nice location. It's down closer to the passenger rail future. But that we had a development that we're considering right there. And I think the population that could be in this facility would definitely need that service. And then my question would be, as we're thinking about this, what's the timing of reallocation of some of the current bus routes? Or we put it on a map and we have a need here, we sort of map the whole thing out, but when do we anticipate some of these coming forth, and how do we advocate for some of those increased services, I guess, would be my question.
I'm happy to the previous graphic too, Timothy, kind of explains it, the previous graphic. So current is what we have now on the left. Short term is probably around 2 years, midterms around 5 years, and long terms, 5 to 10, if that helps. Sorry, Andrew.
Oh, no, good. For the most likely route adjustment would be after the Suggs tracks, if and when and after the Suggs track is developed, we would have those conversations with Go Raleigh about potential rerouting, and with the council and staff too, on balancing the competing priorities of continuing to route it through Old Town versus a detour through the Suggs tract. And then if you go back one slide to showing the mobility hub locations, I believe the one you were talking about, and there's another one in that same area along, I think it was along the boulevard at Marks Creek and Keats Road. We added those in knowing future development will come in those areas and to try to get some improvements made to, further mobility hubs in those locations. Cause we could see if you did have bus rapid transit in the future that went all the way to the Wake Tech campus in Wendell, those would probably be your logical station areas. So we wanted to go ahead and start building momentum for transit in those locations.
And I'll just add in on Andrew's points, which are all really good, is that, part of this study and this planning exercise is funded by the Wake Transit Tax Community Funding Area Program. And each community gets, the ability to compete for funds annually in that. And so once you've completed a planning task, you're able to go to that same pot of funds for both capital and for operating. So to build sidewalk, to build mobility hubs, to build capital improvements, you can do it through that funding source. And then if there's some type of identified micro transit service, whether it's extension of the Northeast Wake County micro transit or some type of other micro transit, whether it be bike share or scooter share or something like that, that we can actually get the operating funds at a 50% split with the Wake Transit Tax District too. So that's kind of how we'll start to fund some of these changes and make it really occur.
Those are all good points.
One last thing I wanted to add is, some of these locations may seem a little strange, like the one on Forestville is kind of pulled in a little bit. But it's because, it's within the town's limits and it's also where greenways come through. So we were trying to find these spots where you have multiple modes of transportation coming through. So you might, in theory, you could ride your bike there, be part of a van pool, or you could have electric vehicle charging there. We tried to pick commuter oriented locations on some of these outer ones where you've got multiple mobility options come together.
Thank you for referencing the greenways. And I realize now it was a mistake to leave off all of these lines, but just imagine these green lines in the background underneath everything as well. And that's kind of why some of those mobility hubs were selected, is because they have these great future greenway connection opportunities.
So just real quick, Jason and Andrew, so when we're reviewing development, we're going to reference this map, I think, to help us make some land use decisions around proximity to these hubs, I would imagine.
Yes, we're my goal is to have a map similar to what y'all have got in the UDO appendices, a separate one similar to the greenways, but for mobility hubs. That way, we can partner with the development community to implement some of these parts of the hubs.
Great points.
This is McDonald. I wanted to question about the neighborhood scale mobility hubs. There's not any on the western side of 540, and I wonder if we're just sort of missing something on that edge of town. I just wondered if we could kind of, I know we've looked at like points of connection and stuff like that, but what does a neighborhood scale mobility hub look like? Where would that fit in on kind of the Hodge Road corridor?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think we had that on the original map. I think we missed it on this version. So we looked at that as kind of like an enhanced bus stop, and there were 3 potential locations in our mind. Because it could be at Old Mill Bernie. We've got a recommendation for future bus stops there once it's signalized. It could be at Westover, say Nightdale Gateway happens at signalized crosswalks. That's a good middle location where a future BRT stop might logically be, or it could be at Hodge Road or some combination of them. But what the neighborhood scale mobility hub would likely be there is, you've a bus pad, shelter, trash cans. You could potentially have some ITS real-time arrival information. Say it's at, Hodge Road. We show the greenway connecting up to there, the one that goes to Diane Street. So you could have bike parking. As the greenway network builds out more, then you could have bike share And then, things like scooters is something, there's a safety concern around, in my opinion, at the moment. If you don't have the greenway network built out and you're not maybe doing geofence to limit operations. But once that's, something that's more feasible, you could have scooters there as well. So that's likely what I would see in that corridor. I think is if you get potentially the other side of 540, you might have more commuter oriented stuff like electric vehicle charging, van pool, potentially depending on what Go Triangle does with their future service, some type of micro transit there as well.
And Ben, I do think there actually is a neighborhood and scale mobility hub at the Hodge Road intersection. It's just covered up by yellow and black dots.
Yes, sir.
I think.
And think of them as modular anyways, like they will get bigger as they get used, right? So they start basic and they get better and better and better over time.
I'd say Pool and Hodge might also be another great spot for one. We've got some density approved there with multifamily. We're anticipating retail, but glad I see the hidden dot under there. So glad to hear that's there.
It's the existing transit stops that are just kind of obscuring. And Andrew's right. We were going to plan one right down here at Old Mill Bernie. I just must have missed digitizing that one.
That's great.
Are
I
these
would point out
available?
that transit service, transit ridership on Route 33 has really rebounded now after, we've kind of eked our way out of COVID and has actually exceeded pre-COVID 2019 levels. So there is a desire for public transportation in Nightdale. And that's been proven through surveys, through the actual ridership, through the comments we got in this process. It is most definitely there. We just have to provide a common sense kind of complementary set of options that make it competitive and work. Right now, it is easier to ride a bicycle when I'm sitting in downtown Raleigh to the Nightdale Library and faster than it is to take a bus. And that's wrong. So, yeah, that's what we're trying to accomplish. But great comments.
Even when it was express, it was close for that ride. So you actually brought up a second question. So first question is, and Jason sees it coming, are these available in GIS layers that we could look at?
They are now.
Thank you. And the other was related to the bus, and now I'm losing my train of thought already. So is there a way to tell that ridership? Do we have information on sort of when they get on, when they get off? Because I'm seeing a lot of people that I feel like are using it as kind of a circulator as opposed to, getting to Raleigh.
Yeah, we do have stop level data that we've accessed. The easy story is that the extreme western end at New Hope Commons is an absolutely dominant location for boardings and alightings for Route 33 because it's interchanging with other services. Kind of makes sense. And then you've got the shopping centers coming in way behind it. I guess Midway and Lowe's and such. So that's the basic profile.
So it would be hard to tell if First Avenue, how much was coming out of First Avenue.
Yeah, there's another graphic in there somewhere, but yeah.
First Avenue and McKnight seem like the areas where riders that really need it may be accessing.
So the size of this dot is the Walmart park and ride, and that is by far larger than any other boarding and alighting along Route 33. Nightdale Station Park is pretty good, and then on either side of 540 is pretty good. So right now that's kind of the total number of boardings and alighting, and it's dominated by the Walmart.
I recall the express bus people used to board at Walmart that were coming from that southern First Avenue area. So
and to give you the idea of the scale, the big red thing around the edge,
like
that I know your color issue there, but thanks, Tim. That is more square in downtown Raleigh.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
That's why it's the sun. That's the sun, and we're like,
it's like here,
the moon, Mars.
And this one, this is Wake Med.
I just wanted to interject real quick. If anybody needs to drop off, I know we're a little past 7. Feel free to go ahead and do so. I'll follow up with the slides and summary of next steps by email. So if anybody needs to drop off, please do.
Well, I plan to bite my tongue the rest of the time so that anyone who hasn't spoken has a chance.
And we do have a proposal to extend Route 33 west to the Wake Village Center. Thanks, Timothy, for pointing that out, which is really important in my head for an equity standpoint for many other reasons, but yeah.
So I hope we've adequately confused people with roadway recommendations and the lines everywhere. We've sort of made it more convoluted with the different types of biking and walking improvements and what we call certain things that look very similar. I like talking transit. It's a little bit more tidy and neatly packaged, but there we are. We've got a framework for what to improve and where. But we hit on a really good topic about how we can encourage these things to happen sooner, and that leads us right into prioritization. And it's a brief conversation at this point, but I want to make sure everyone's up to speed with kind of where we're thinking about going with these things. Beginning with a reminder from the survey, we had over 300 respondents, and we asked them how they would spend $100 on transportation funding given certain types. Basically, what's a percent out of 100? The items that are labeled in black and are centered on the bottom, those are all roadway related. So more roads, more lanes, intersections, increased traffic flow, and address vehicle speeds. There they all are split out. Everything that's in white text and is kind of centered to the top, those are all your multimodal. So Greenway scored very high, improved sidewalks, improved the bus system, streetscape amenities, and bikeways as well. So there's a great balance here. I mean, 15% down to 7%. So there really is a good kind of strategy here from what people have suggested. And it's maybe 50-50. Improve roadways and what we care about for driving, improve multimodal and how we can improve those other modes as well. So I see this as a 50-50 split and a really good balance. But what I really see is a lot of people have a lot of opinions, right? You're never going to get an 80-20 when it comes to this question, ever. So I'm encouraged by what I see and just kind of reinforce that we are looking for the multimodal solutions here, right? A good balance of how people perceive improvements. Now, when it comes to prioritizing these projects and these draft lines that we have for you, we want to use Campo's methodology for scoring projects, because if it scores well in Campo, it has a much greater chance of getting funding in the long term. So coming up with our own strategy of what's important is great for the town, but if we actually want to see some of these regional arterials constructed and these improvements, we should probably make sure we're aligning our priority scoring with theirs so it makes the most amount of sense. So I highlighted in orange several that really are a strong connection between the two. We heard a lot about safety in our engagement and outreach. We heard a lot about accessibility of connectivity, those 2-lane collector streets that kind of make that low stress network and path, and then multimodal elements. So there you go. At least half of the system scoring that Campbell utilizes for roadways are very strongly reflected in our engagement and our outreach to date. When it comes to walking and biking, it's more than 50%. It's the safety, it's access, and it's connectivity. So I think we're there. I don't want to sort of pull the rug out from under anyone and say we're going to prioritize these things. I think the point here is that what we've heard the town values is already very largely reflected in the regional funding structure. So I think it's all very good news, and we're just going to roll with how we measure and prioritize short-term, mid-term, and long-term, using these criteria kind of as a guide. Andrew or Scott, you want to chime in on any portion of there before we talk about the transit side?
I mean, for $15 of roadway funding, you might get a mile of an extra lane. For the same amount, you might get 7 greenways. So, I think there's, I think in terms of the impact, it's important to think about what the spatial impact is of some of these things as well. That's all I would add. And some will be funded by private sector sources with land development and redevelopment, and some will be funded maybe by the state, maybe. So feasibility, cost feasibility depends a lot on how well it scores in this system, and intersection improvements, smaller scale improvements that have a high bang for the buck, which I think I'm hearing people kind of would like to favor for some roadways as a first step. Would probably be great to parse those out and submit those through Spot STI.
Perfect.
Just because they'll do better.
There's big infrastructure projects, there's medium roadway project, and then there's really small, easy intersection improvement projects. Though they get scored, the easier ones are much more easily handled through LAP funds and done locally. So you can get a lot done of those small scale project improvements. That's a great point. On the transit side, we think it's really important that we're aligning with the Wake Transit prioritization policy. I think the question was, how do we justify some of these improvements in the near term? Their formula is kind of a 4-category formula. If you can show you're developing more transit accessibility here, like connecting people with jobs or improving the connectivity, that's going to score a lot higher than connecting people in places, and then enhancing the existing transit service or sustaining kind of those passenger and service hours. So that's their formula, and Wake Transit Plan kind of spells out how they want to prioritize service enhancements, like taking a 60-minute headway down to 30, taking a 30 down to a 15. And so we're going to try to use their measures and their formulas here to kind of reinforce these needs. And this will be how we get more near-term funded improvements, is through the Wake Transit Plan.
It's important to note, though, that their idea of prioritization is very, very different from what Spot STI says in the last slide. The previous slide for roadways is very score dependent. You get a score of 83.7524. On this one, it's more, is this in alignment with the local governments? Are they going to cover their costs, their share of the costs? Does it fit in with the overall objectives of the 10-year plan and the overall plan? So it's a little bit different situation with transit than it is with roadways on that prioritization stuff. Best thing you can do is put density in these corridors. That's going to say, that's going to do more than just about anything else.
Because density will drive the ridership numbers, and the ridership numbers justify the need for more service. So the easiest, biggest thing you can do is get more people in a denser location along that bus route. Absolutely. So lastly, or before we really jump to the next kind of the next steps, just want to reiterate that here is the link. I'm going to share it one more time in the chat box. If I can find my chat box. To make sure everyone has it, because we want to be sure that you guys are reviewing these one more time in greater detail and kind of seeing some of those pieces. I see some comments on here already, which is great. That's kind of what we want to see. So please continue doing just that for the next couple of days. We will be sure to read all of those. So thank you. Where is my chat box? Can somebody find their chat box and possibly put in this link for me? I don't know why I can't.
I don't have one, and that occasionally happens to me sometimes on this platform.
Yeah, mine sort of disappeared.
Let's blame Dustin.
You can blame me. I didn't see a chat box either.
Okay, so we will obviously include this with the meeting slides as well. But look at this, we've got some wonderful people in there moving things around. So thank you for that. Yeah. We want to be reformatting and revising kind of this feedback over the next week or two. We'll be looking for an open house in July to come and kind of share more of these ideas with people in an actual in-person environment where they can kind of view, tell us what we missed, and have some more voting exercises when it comes to what they value in the near midterm. The target audience will be just about everybody, and we will use you guys to kind of help us communicate and get the word out. So you're not off the hook just yet. Thank you for the work thus far. We're going to lean on you one more time to help spread the news when we get to the open house kind of format. So that's there. We will be doing that in the July timeframe with a draft report getting formalized in pieces along the way. We are going to have a fourth advisory committee meeting where we'll be looking just at the draft report pieces and making final edits in that late summer or early fall timeline. So that's kind of just the schedule looking forward and how we're shaping up for the remainder of our calendar. Anything I've missed here, Andrew, along the way? We kind of went through the roadways, the bike ped, the transit, and a little bit on prioritization as well. And then we're going to leave everyone with the mural link to kind of get more feedback.
Nothing you've missed. The only thing I might add is we may have some additional conversations around the number of lanes in the roadway plan. We definitely, very receptive to the feedback received, but we may want to keep the convo going over, are there any roadways or segments where we may want that additional capacity? Just try to get some additional clarity from this group there as we continue to move forward.
Excellent. Well said. And I'm all for making sure the locals have the town and the future needs that they want. So we are trying to navigate that balance. And as multimodal planners and designers, kind of we're on that side of the equation too. So we are hard working for all those lines and segments and dash lines to make total sense in the end and complement one another, right? We're looking for systems that function. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Look for kind of a summary slides from Andrew. We'll also post the video and PDF of slides and materials on the project website, shiftnightdale.com. So if for whatever reason in a pinch you can't find it in your email, it's always on the website. So we'll have that up and running very shortly. Andrew, you want to thank closing remarks and thank everyone?
Yeah. Thank you all for taking time out of your evening. And I know, you're kind of absorbing this as we go. So as we send out the slides, it's on the website. Any thoughts, comments, questions you have, reach out to us and we're happy to, work through those, and hope you all have a good rest of your evening.